On a wet morning in March 2026, the trading screens glow like hospital monitors in a dim room. Most people think crashes happen because presidents fail or enemies strike or headlines turn ugly. They don't. They happen when the ledger flips, the balance sheet bleeds, and insolvency becomes plain arithmetic. The myth says power lives in speeches and signatures, in flags and podiums and strong hands on the wheel. The truth is colder. Bankruptcy doesn't negotiate, and insolvency doesn't care who's yelling. When the numbers go negative, the nation doesn't lose. It gets liquidated. You can call it a recession if that helps you sleep. But the ledger uses harder words, like margin call, foreclosure, and forced sale. The crash isn't a mood swing. It's a balance sheet event. Now picture the United States at its peak, the way it sells itself to the world in glossy postcards. Jets carve clean lines over stadiums, parades glitter, and the skyline looks like steel confidence. The dollar moves like a king's decree, and everyone else nods because the crown is accepted everywhere. At the ports, containers stack like modern pyramids. On the highways, trucks hold the proof of consumption from one horizon to the next. In boardrooms, executives toast another record quarter like it's a birthright. On paper, it looks like majesty. On paper, it looks like the richest empire in human history. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. Rot doesn't announce itself with a siren. Rot works quietly, like a leak behind a wall, turning beams into powder. You don't see it until the floor gives way. In the American story, the rot has a simple name: debt. Not the kind you feel when you buy a car, but the kind that rewrites national destiny. Debt is the monster that eats tomorrow and calls it growth. Debt is also an addiction because it starts as a tool and becomes a habit. It makes hard choices feel optional and consequences feel postponed. It tells you the bill can always be paid later. For decades, the fix was easy: borrow cheap, spend big, and let prosperity mask the hangover. Politicians of every color learned the same trick. They could hand out candy today and send the invoice to strangers in the future. Then interest rates rose, and the addiction met its dealer. The antagonist wasn't a general or a rival flag. It was the bond market, sitting in the dark, tapping a pen, asking one question: can you pay? In this thriller, the villain doesn't wear a mask. The villain wears a suit and speaks in yields, spreads, and auctions. The bondholders don't invade beaches. They raise the price of money. When people argue about whether Trump can stop the crash, they imagine a lever in the Oval Office. They'd picture a man pressing a red button labeled Fix Economy. But there is no button, because the ledger doesn't run on charisma. Trump can shout at the cameras, bully a bureaucracy, and threaten a central bank. He can cut a deal with allies, or pick a fight with rivals, or throw a tariff like a brick. None of that changes a balance sheet that is already underwater, because the trap isn't political, it's mathematical. It was built slowly year after year, like a tunnel dug from inside the vault. Start with the national debt, the big number people repeat like a curse. Imagine it at $36 trillion by late 2025, with another $2 trillion added like clockwork. Let that number sink in, because it's not a statistic. It's a claim on your future cash. Now add the part that doesn't make headlines, the carrying cost. Interest isn't dramatic, but it is relentless, like dripping water that hollows stone. When interest climbs past $1 trillion a year, the nation starts paying rent on its own past. Here's where the ledger gets cruel. You can't negotiate with compound interest using applause. You can't refinance your way out when the rate itself is the executioner. People say just cut spending as if it's a single knob. But the budget isn't one knob. It's a room full of locked doors. Some doors are labeled Social Security, Medicare, Defense, and Debt Service, and each has a crowd behind it. Try to cut Social Security, and you ignite a firestorm of voters. Try to cut Medicare, and you threaten hospitals and seniors in the same breath. Try to cut defense, and you get accused of weakening the state's spine. So presidents do what presidents always do in a corner. They delay. They borrow. They roll the debt forward like a boulder pushed uphill, praying the hill never ends. By early 2026, Treasury auctions become the pulse of the empire. The government must sell fresh IOUs to pay old IOUs, because that's how the machine runs. This isn't ideology. It's refinancing. In a healthy system, refinancing is routine. In a sick system, refinancing is survival. And survival gets expensive when lenders smell fear. This is where the Federal Reserve enters like a reluctant surgeon. The Fed can cut rates to numb pain, but that risks inflaming prices. The Fed can raise rates to crush inflation, but that risks crushing everything else. The Fed is trapped in a hallway with two doors, and behind each door is a different disaster. Door one is high rates, which makes mortgage bite and credit freeze. Door two is low rates, which makes the dollar bleed purchasing power in public. Presidents love to pretend they command the Fed. They don't, not formally and not cleanly. Even if Trump could order the Fed like a general, the bond market would still be watching from the shadows. Because the market is the real tribunal. If investors decide the dollar is being diluted, they demand higher yields. If yields rise, the budget bleeds faster. If the budget bleeds faster, the only medicine left is more printing. Printing is the old magic trick of empires. It looks like rescue at first, because checks arrive and panic quiets down. But it is also dilution, and dilution is a slow theft. You feel it in bread before you feel it in bonds. You feel it when rent jumps and wages don't follow. You feel it when savings turn to sand. Now fold in demographics the quiet inevitability that no election can reverse on schedule. Around 10,000 Americans turn 65 every day, like a metronome counting down. That's millions of new claims on the system each year, written in human need. In 1950, there were many workers for every retiree, and the math looked friendly. By the 2020s, the ratio shrank, and the burden thickened. By the time 2030 approaches, the worker base strains like a rope pulled too tight. Demographics are slow-motion destiny. You can't executive order a baby boom. You can't tweet an extra generation into existence. Immigration could help the math, but politics turns it into a landmine. One side wants walls, the other wants compassion, and both want votes. Meanwhile, the ledger only asks how many paychecks exist to fund how many promises. Then comes the global angle, where the thriller leaves the home office and enters the world's back rooms. The dollar's power is a resource like oil, and other nations want alternatives. Not because they're evil, but because dependence is dangerous. Sanctions taught the world a lesson. Dollars can be weaponized. Freezing reserves showed every finance minister what captivity looks like. After that, even allies start thinking about exits. By 2024 and 2025, more trade begins settling outside dollars in small, cautious steps. Think of it like termites, not an explosion. The house still stands, but the beams are being eaten. The dollarization isn't a switch, it's a trend. It starts with bilateral deals, local currency swaps, gold purchases, and payment rails built quietly. Then one day, the demand for U.S. debt is weaker than the Treasury expected, and the auction tail grows teeth. And while that plays out, another trap tightens at home: commercial real estate. Office towers that once printed rent like cash machines become half-lit shells after remote work. The leases don't vanish politely. They expire, and they don't renew. By 2026, imagine $1.5 trillion in commercial loans needing refinancing over a short window. These loans were priced for a different world, a world with full buildings and zero rates. Now rates are higher, and occupancy is lower, and the numbers don't meet. Owners can't refinance at new terms without admitting their buildings lost value. Admitting lost value is like admitting guilt in a courtroom of lenders. Once the appraisal drops, the equity evaporates, and the lender starts writing harsh letters. Regional banks sit in the crosshairs because many hold the paper tied to local towers and malls. They aren't villains. They're middlemen. But middlemen die first when the chain snaps. In the ledger's language, a bank run is just a speed test. It measures whether confidence is real or theatrical. When depositors move faster than assets can be sold, the institution becomes insolvent in public. So the government faces a familiar temptation: bailouts. Bailouts are described as stability, but they are also transfers, and transfers have political costs. Every rescue tells the market one thing: risk is socialized when the smoke gets thick. Now zoom out, because the most dangerous weapon is not debt alone. It is the web of derivatives, the shadow contracts that lace the financial world together. They are promises built on other promises, stacked like dry wood. People throw around numbers like $600 trillion in notional exposure because it sounds like science fiction. But the real danger isn't the size on paper. It's the interconnection. When one counterparty fails, others start doubting every handshake. In 2008, mortgage derivatives taught the world what contagion looks like. In the 2020s, the web is larger and faster, built on interest rate swaps, currency hedges, and leveraged bets. When rates swing hard, the hedges can become knives. This is why presidents look powerful until the margin clerk calls. In a leverage system, the margin clerk outranks the king. The ledger doesn't salute. It demands collateral. So when Trump says he wants to fix the economy, he might mean it. He understands deals, leverage, and branding, and he respects the raw force of money. But this crisis isn't a negotiation. It's a reckoning, because the crash isn't one event. It's a convergence like storms meeting over the same coastline. Debt service rises. Refinancing tightens, demographic strain, real estate weakens, and global trust frays. Trust is the invisible asset on every balance sheet. The dollar is partially backed by the belief that America pays, America stabilizes, America endures. When that belief cracks, yields rise before speeches finish. Think about the scale of that. You can't print trust like you print currency. You can't sanction a market into admiring you. Now we start the descent, and it moves chronologically like a spiral. In 2025, officials insist the system is resilient, and headlines nod along. By spring 2026, the tone changes, because auctions get choppy and layoffs whisper through tech and finance. In summer 2026, a big regional bank reports unexpected losses tied to office exposure. It tries to raise capital, but the market asks for a discount that feels like humiliation. The stock drops, depositors watch, and the speed test begins. By autumn 2026, mortgage rates pinch households and credit card delinquencies climb like a fever. Consumers pull back, not because they read charts, but because they feel pain. Restaurants empty a little, then a lot, and small businesses lose oxygen. The rule of three hits like a hammer. The credit was tightening. The asset values were falling. The confidence was leaving. That's how spirals become collapses. By early 2027, Congress argues about spending cuts, as if debate can feed a hungry ledger. Every proposal is a political suicide note, so nothing real passes. The deficit remains, and the refinancing calendar keeps marching. This is where the smoking gun moment appears, not as a gunshot, but as a document. Imagine a Treasury memo circulated after a closed-door meeting in January 2027, titled like a bland spreadsheet. Inside are the words nobody wants to say out loud: funding gap under stressed auction demand. It reads like an obituary written in numbers. It lists auction sizes, maturity walls, and projected interest costs under higher yields. The memo doesn't accuse anyone. It simply implies foreclosure. In that meeting, the brutal reality is paraphrased in polite language. We need buyers, someone says, meaning we need lenders who still believe. We can't shock the system, another replies, meaning we can't admit what we are. Then comes the negotiation that feels like a liquidation sale. Foreign holders want shorter maturities, higher yields, and clearer fiscal restraint. Domestic institutions want backstops, guarantees, and silent protection from mark-to-market losses. And the government, trapped between optics and math, offers what it always offers. It offers more paper, more promises, and more confidence theater. It is not a strategy, it is triage. This is also where presidents become actors on a set built by accountants. Trump can announce a historic plan and declare victory before the ink dries. But the bond market doesn't clap because it is reading the fine print. If Trump pushes stimulus, the short-term sugar rush may calm streets and boost headlines. But the ledger records it as added liabilities. If Trump pressures the Fed to cut rates, the ledger records the dollar's dilution risk. If Trump tries tariffs to force manufacturing back, supply chains may snarl and prices may jump. Inflation is not a moral judgment. It is a price signal under stress. And under stress, signals get loud. So the climax arrives like winter, not like a lightning strike. It is the moment cash literally runs out in the private sense, when credit lines vanish and payrolls fail. It is the moment firms can't roll debt, and layoffs become a flood. Hunger shows up first in the quiet places, where pantry lines lengthen and pride dissolves. Cold comes next, when utilities shut off and rents don't get paid. Humiliation follows when families who never asked for help start asking anyway. Sovereignty is solvency. That sentence sounds abstract until you watch it happen. When solvency fails, sovereignty becomes conditional, and policy becomes permission. In this default moment, it may not be a formal declaration on television. It may be a temporary emergency facility, a weekend bank holiday, a new rule about withdrawals. It may be capital controls with a friendly name. People will say, "This can't happen here," because they confuse wealth with liquidity. But wealth is a photograph, and liquidity is motion. When motion stops, the photograph means nothing. The state will try to keep motion alive with printing and backstops. The Fed will expand facilities, swap lines, and guarantees, all the tools it used before, only bigger. But bigger medicine has bigger side effects, and the body is already weak. In the streets, politics turns radioactive. Everyone looks for a villain with a face, because a spreadsheet can't be punched. Some will blame Trump because he is loud and visible, and visibility attracts blame. Others will blame the Fed, Wall Street, immigrants, foreign rivals, or the elites. Blame is a coping mechanism when the real cause is arithmetic. The ledger doesn't care who wins the argument, because the interest still accrues at midnight. Now the generational aftermath begins. The part documentaries often skip because it isn't glamorous. Families change their behavior for decades after a financial trauma. They save more, trust less, and treat risk like a predator. The government restructures programs in slow, painful reforms. Benefits get trimmed, eligibility ages creep upward, and inflation indexing changes by stealth. It is amputation presented as modernization. On the international stage, the dollar remains important, but less sacred. New settlement systems gain traction, and reserves diversify like a survival instinct. The United States still sells paper, but the price of paper stays higher. Debt doesn't vanish. It gets rolled, stretched, and disguised. But the bill remains, and each generation inherits a share of the wound. The crash becomes a reference point, like 1929 or 2008. A scar used to explain everything. Imagine the final check not as a celebratory moment, but as a quiet administrative entry. In 2048, a restructured tranche from the crisis era is finally retired. Principal and interest closed in a dry transaction. No parade follows because payment is not triumph. It is restoration. And the people who lived through the crash still flinch at the sound of certain words. Yield, auction, liquidity, facility. These words become ghost stories told at kitchen tables. That is the hidden outcome of financial history. Empires don't just lose money, they lose innocence. They learn that resources, debt, and the ledger decide what speeches never can. So when you hear the title question again, hear it like a detective reading a case file. The real reason Trump can't stop this crash is that it isn't his crash to command. It is the convergence of long arithmetic, built over decades, now demanding payment in real life. History is not decided by armies or politicians. It is decided by accountants, debt, and resources, by cash flow and refinancing windows. The ledger is the author, and presidents are footnotes written in bold. If you want to survive a world like this, stop looking for saviors in suits. Start looking at balance sheets, at incentives, at what must be paid and what cannot be paid. Learn to respect the quiet power of numbers, because numbers don't campaign. Subscribe to this channel if you want to stay ahead of people who only watch politics like it's a sport. We will keep tracing the dark economic truths hiding under public theater, because the next crisis never arrives with a drumline.